Mike's suspicion grew, so he tested it again. He turned on different taps around the house, checking the pressure. Every single time the neighbor's pump was running, the pressure in Mike's house dropped significantly. And every time the pump turned off, the pressure returned to normal. This wasn't a coincidence. This was theft. Mike started putting the pieces together. The previous owners had mentioned that the water bills kept going up over the 3 years the house sat empty. They assumed it was due to leaks in the old plumbing. The house was in rough shape after all. But the bills were surprisingly high for just leaks. Way too high. Now it all made sense. At some point during those 3 years of abandonment, this old man next door had decided he didn't want to pay for water anymore. So he walked onto the property, found Mike's water line, and tapped into it. For 3 years, he'd been siphoning water from a house that didn't belong to him, running up someone else's bill and pocketing the savings. Mike searched around his property, trying to find where exactly the connection was, but he couldn't locate it. The old man had hidden it well. Still, the evidence was undeniable. Every time that pump ran, Mike's water pressure dropped. The math was simple. So Mike sat on this information for a few days. He thought about his options. Should he confront the old man directly? Should he call the police and go the legal route? Or should he just let it go? Now, here's the thing. Water in Mike's country is incredibly cheap. Even with 3 dogs to wash, a car to clean every week, and a garden to water, Mike's monthly water bill was only about $5. Even with the neighbor stealing some of it, the cost was negligible. But this wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. This was about principle. This was about an entitled old man who thought he could steal from someone else without consequences, who thought that just because a house was empty, he had the right to use its resources for free, who probably laughed to himself every month when his water bill came in at 0, knowing he was getting away with it. Mike wasn't going to let that slide. He wanted to teach this man a lesson he would never, ever forget. But Mike also didn't want to break any laws. He didn't want to trespass onto the neighbor's property. He didn't want to get into a messy legal battle. He wanted something simple, clean, effective. And then it hit him. The perfect plan. Elegant in its simplicity. Devastating in its consequences. All Mike had to do was turn off his own water supply. That's it. Just walk to the main valve on his property and turn it off. No illegal activity. No confrontation. Just turning off a tap. But the results? Oh, the results would be beautiful. So Mike waited. He watched. He planned. And on Monday, just 4 days ago, he put his plan into action. He waited until he heard the neighbor's water pump kick on. That familiar hum. The sound of theft in progress. And then, calmly, Mike walked over to his main water supply valve and turned it off. Now, let me explain what happens when you do this. The neighbor's rooftop water tank has a float valve inside it, kind of like the one in a toilet. When the water level drops, the valve opens and sends an electronic signal to the pump, telling it to turn on and refill the tank. When the tank is full, the valve closes and the pump shuts off automatically. But here's the problem. With Mike's water supply cut off, no water was flowing into the neighbor's tank. So the valve stayed open, and the pump kept running, and running, and running. Now, any mechanic will tell you that running a water pump dry is a terrible idea. Pumps are designed to move water, and that water also helps cool the pump's internal components. Without water flowing through it, the pump overheats. It burns out. It dies. Mike knew this. He expected the pump to burn out within a few hours. Maybe the neighbor would have to pay a few $100s for a new pump. A fitting punishment for 3 years of theft, right? But what Mike didn't expect was what happened next. Because this old man's house didn't just have an old pump, it had old wiring. Very old wiring. We're talking 1990s-era electrical systems. Outdated. Dangerous. Not built to handle modern electrical loads, and definitely not built to handle a water pump running continuously for hours on end. The pump kept drawing power. Over and over and over. All day. Into the evening. And then, all through the night. The electrical system couldn't handle it. The wires started overheating. The circuit breakers, old and worn out, failed to trip like they should have. The whole system was overloading, and there was nothing to stop it. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, Mike was woken up by shouting. Loud, panicked voices coming from next door. He looked out the window and saw lights turning on in the neighboring houses. But the old man's house? Completely dark. The wiring had finally given out. The entire electrical system had fried. The house had lost power. And of course, with no power, the pump had stopped. Which meant no water either. Mike listened as the chaos unfolded. The tenants on the upper floors were awake, confused, and angry. They were shouting down at the landlord, demanding to know why they had no power or water. The old man was trying to calm them down, making excuses, promising it would be fixed soon. But it wasn't going to be fixed soon. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Mike watched as electricians arrived at the neighbor's house. They inspected the wiring, shook their heads, and delivered the bad news. The entire system needed to be replaced, and it wasn't going to be cheap. But the real disaster was just beginning. You see, in Mike's country, tenant protection laws are incredibly strict. Power and water are classified as essential services at the state level. Landlords are legally required to provide them at all times. Cutting off these services, for any reason other than weather or natural disasters, is illegal. And the landlord is responsible for maintaining the property's electrical and plumbing systems in good working order. The tenants knew their rights, and they were not happy. One of the tenants, a young professional who worked from home, was informed that the power and water wouldn't be restored for at least several days, possibly longer. He couldn't work, he couldn't shower, he couldn't cook. So he did what any smart tenant would do. He packed his bags and moved out. 2 days later, he was gone. But before he left, he did something else. He filed a formal complaint with the police, and so did the other tenant. Now, in this country, if the police determine that someone is in clear violation of tenant protection laws, they have the authority to issue fines on the spot. No trial, no court hearing, just an immediate financial penalty. The person can challenge it in court later if they want, but they still have to pay the fine up front. The old man was hit with a fine of $500. In his country, that's a massive amount of money. For context, that's about 2 months' worth of rent income from his tenants. But it got worse. Because he'd lost both tenants, he also had to refund their security deposits. That's another chunk of money gone. And here's the kicker. He legally cannot rent out those floors again until the electrical and water issues are fully resolved. And resolving those issues, rewiring an entire 3-story house, that's going to cost thousands of dollars. Money he doesn't have. Those 2 tenants were his only source of income. He's a retired mechanic with no pension, no savings, and no other way to make money. And now, he's got nothing. As of right now, the old man is packing up his things. He's moving out this Sunday. He can't afford to live in his own house anymore. He's going to live with his daughter, completely financially ruined. And how did he figure out what caused all this? Well, after the electricians diagnosed the problem, they traced it back to the water pump. It had been running continuously, drawing power non-stop, which overloaded the old wiring and caused the entire system to fail. The old man put 2 and 2 together. He realized the pump had been running because there was no water. And there was no water because Mike had turned off his supply. So, a few days ago, the old man came to Mike's gate. He stood there, looking tired and defeated, and asked Mike a simple question. "Did you turn off your water supply?" Mike, cool as ice, looked him right in the eye and said, "Oh yeah, my tank had a new leak on a pipe. I had to turn it off until the plumber came by to fix it the next day." The look on the old man's face was priceless. He didn't say anything. He didn't argue. He didn't accuse Mike of anything. He just stood there for a moment, his face completely blank, holding back whatever he was really thinking. Finally, he just muttered, "Oh, okay," and walked away. Mike doesn't know if the old man suspects the truth, but honestly, it doesn't matter. Because even if he does, there's nothing he can do about it. Mike broke no laws. He simply turned off his own water supply to fix a leak. That's it. And next week, Mike is getting a plumber to come and properly seal off his water lines, removing any connections that leave his property. No more theft. No more problems. So, let's recap. An entitled old man stole water for 3 years, thinking he was clever, thinking he'd never get caught, thinking there would be no consequences. Then Mike moved in, and with one simple action, one turn of a valve, the old man's entire world collapsed. He lost his tenants. He lost his income. He got fined by the police. He can't afford to fix his house. And now, he's being forced to move in with his daughter, completely broke and humiliated. All because he couldn't pay $5 a month for water. Was it harsh? Maybe. Was it deserved? Absolutely. Mike didn't break any laws. He didn't even confront the man. He just turned off a tap. And karma did the rest. 2 birds, 1 stone. Or in this case, 1 valve. This is the power of patience, strategy, and letting karma do the heavy lifting. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, and absolutely devastating. What would you have done in Mike's situation? Would you have confronted the neighbor? Gone to the police? Or done exactly what Mike did? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because karma, it always catches up. Thanks for watching. And remember, don't steal from your neighbors. You never know who you're messing with. See you in the next one. An elderly neighbor thought he could steal water for 3 years without consequences. What happened next didn't just ruin his day. It destroyed his entire life. By the end of this story, he lost everything. His income, his home, his dignity. All because he couldn't pay $5 a month for water. This is the story of the ultimate karma. Before we begin, let me set the scene. Our story takes place in Asia, in the heart of a bustling capital city. Our protagonist, let's call him Mike, had just purchased a new house. Now, this wasn't just any house. The previous owners were family friends who had moved abroad 3 years ago and desperately needed cash. So Mike got an incredible deal on a property in one of the most expensive areas of the city. But there was a catch. The house was a complete fixer-upper. The previous owners had left mid-renovation, and the place had been sitting empty for 3 entire years. When Mike first walked through the property, he knew he had his work cut out for him. The main door didn't even have a proper lock, just a simple padlock that anyone could cut through. There was no gate around the property, meaning literally anyone could just walk right onto his land. The whole place screamed abandoned. But Mike wasn't discouraged. He saw potential. And the price? Unbeatable. So he closed the deal at the start of the month and moved in immediately. Now, the very first day Mike moved into his new home, he got a taste of what kind of neighborhood he was dealing with. He pulled into the driveway, ready to unload his belongings. And what did he find? Someone's motorcycle. Just sitting there, in his garage, on his property. Can you imagine? You buy a house, you're excited to move in, and there's already someone else's vehicle parked in your garage like they own the place. Mike didn't lose his cool. He's a 6-foot-tall guy with 3 large dogs, so he wasn't worried about confrontation. But he also didn't want to start drama on day one. So he simply wheeled the bike out to the road and went about his business. That same day, he had a gate installed. Problem solved, right? Not quite. About 15 minutes after he moved the bike, there was loud, aggressive knocking on his brand new gate. Mike looked out the window and saw an angry man shouting and demanding his motorcycle back. Mike didn't even bother opening the gate. He just watched through the window as the man eventually gave up, grabbed his bike, and rode off in a huff. Already Mike wasn't loving the neighborhood, but he figured, okay, people just didn't know the house was occupied now. It had been empty for 3 years. They probably thought it was still abandoned. Over the next few days, Mike noticed more issues. People kept parking in front of his gate, blocking him in. It was like they were so used to using this property as their personal space that they didn't even think twice about it. So Mike put up a big, bright no parking sign on his gate. That seemed to do the trick. Things calmed down. Mike started settling in. He focused on fixing up the house, getting his 3 dogs comfortable, and adjusting to his new neighborhood. And then, about a week after moving in, something strange happened. Mike was taking a shower one morning when he noticed the water pressure was unusually low. Now, he'd been living there for a week, and the pressure had been fine up until that point. So this was weird. As he stood there under the weak stream of water, he heard something, a sound coming from next door. It was his neighbor's water pump. Running. Now let me explain how water systems work in this part of the world. Most houses, especially multi-story ones, need a water pump to push water from the public supply up to rooftop storage tanks. The public water pressure isn't strong enough to reach 3 stories on its own. So when you need water, the pump kicks on, fills the tank, and then shuts off automatically. Mike's next-door neighbor was an old man, probably in his 70s, who lived on the ground floor of a 3-story house. The upper 2 floors were rented out to tenants, so naturally, this guy needed a water pump to supply water to all 3 floors. At first, Mike thought it was just a coincidence. The neighbor's pump happened to be running while he was showering. No big deal, right? But something in Mike's gut told him to check it out. So he waited. He stood there in the shower, listening. Eventually, the neighbor's pump shut off, and the moment it did, Mike turned on the tap again. Suddenly, the water pressure was back to normal. Strong, consistent, exactly how it should be.